I'm your host, Tommy Ashley. You're listening to the Inside Carolina podcast sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com. Jason Staples trying to throw me off there. Got to remember what we're doing today. It's the Game Plan podcast. If you'd have told me 6 months ago, I said we'd be doing a Game Plan podcast 2 days before Carolina kicks off the 2020 football season, I might have thought you crazy. But Greg Barnes, here we are. Are you ready to cover some football?
Yeah, the fact that we are is tremendous, Tommy. I thought, kind of like you, a few months back, this was not going to happen. But the numbers have gotten better, and I think money rules all, as we all know. And so that was a driving factor in making sure football was being played. And so here we are. It's a revamped schedule. A lot of things are different. We're missing the Big Ten and the Pac-12, at least at this point of the season. They may come scurrying back sooner than later. But it is football, and between the lines, it's all the same as it's always been.
It is. It's crazy. I said back in April and March, they're playing football come hell or high water. They have to. And, there's been a lot of high water and a lot of hell going on, but Carolina kicks it off. Before I forget, if you're listening to this on iTunes and Spotify, you need to go rate us, review us, subscribe, whatever it takes for you to get this content. Also on YouTube, if you're watching us, you see Jason, that's not the Death Star, but it always reminds me of the Death Star, Jason Staples, up in your top left corner, live from the library in Hogwarts. Maybe that's what that is. Jason, I'm going to bring you in. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it still feels kind of weird that we're talking about a college football season that's about to start. Your overall thoughts on that? Where did you think we'd be 6 months ago?
I would have bet a reasonable amount of money that we were going to be looking at probably trying to do something in the spring. I just didn't see. I mean, I know that cash rules everything around me, but at the same point, I also know that it takes a certain amount of political will to go through with the season when you know that there's a lot of at least perceived risk when it comes to this, what is a very serious virus. And I didn't think that they'd be able to manage the virus or all of the other things that you have to do to be able to get that done this season. So I'm about as thrilled as anybody just to be able to have this fall, because I didn't expect it. So yeah. And by the way, this is Dr. Strange's.
Yeah, that's right.
Not Hogwarts here, but I can make it. I can make it the Death Star if you want. So
whatever works. Just keep the
Star Destroyer.
Keep the dog out of it, and you know which dog I'm talking about. Greg, we talked a little bit about this off air, and I want to talk about it here with our listeners and our watchers. We, if this was a normal season, we're all down in Atlanta right now preparing for Carolina's second game of the year against a very good Auburn team. And that would have been after Carolina had gone to Orlando to play against a very good Central Florida team. Given all that's happened and how the schedule has changed and all that, I can't think of a better way for North Carolina to open the year with who they've got coming to Kenan Stadium on Saturday, and especially given how things have been over the last 6 months.
Yeah, knock on wood, I guess we would say, but things have turned very favorably for North Carolina. The fact that you go back to the end of June and we hear about a cluster of cases throughout the football program, that becomes a concern. Here we are 2 months later. They have not had any positive cases since then. And what that means is that throughout the entirety of training camp, they had the full roster available to them, which is really a critical development. That has not been the case throughout the Power Five, most spots. And then when you factor in that because of how things transpired, when students returned to campus, all athletic activity halted for about 4 days. So North Carolina lost a number of days there. But as you said, when the schedule was changed, you don't have to play that first week of September. And so North Carolina was able to make up those 4 days of practice and strength and conditioning workouts during that week. And so the fact that they were able to get in all 25 practices before the first game, that's a big benefit. And then when you talk about the schedule itself, when you start at Central Florida and then against Auburn in Georgia, which is may not be a away game, but it was certainly going to benefit the Tigers. Those are two top 25 programs, and that's going to be a very tough start for North Carolina, for any team, but especially for North Carolina. Now you have this shakeup of the schedule, and all of a sudden you've got Syracuse, who was not very good last year. They've had some issues in the offseason. There's not a lot of expectation they're going to be much better this year. And then fast forward a week, and you have Charlotte as your new non-conference team, and then a bye week. So while you did miss spring practice and you did miss a portion of your off-season workouts back in spring and May and early June, you have a little bit of a extra time period here where you can kind of see which guys do you have that can play, which of the young guys can contribute before you get into the meat of the season in October. And so everything's just kind of set up very nice for North Carolina. If they can take advantage of these first two opportunities to get big leads, to be able to get a lot of guys snaps, I think we'll be talking about this as a very favorable development for UNC deep into the season and even after the season.
Jason, is it possible for Carolina to get back on the track they would have been on, given how this is all ultimately shaken out? Meaning without spring, without normal summer, without all that, but given how it's actually worked out, I mean, is this team going to be as close as it possibly could have been to whatever expectations they were coming into 2020?
If anything, I think this team, and for a lot of the reasons that Greg just said, I think this team's in a better position than it would have been, because everything has to be taken comparatively when you're in a competitive sport. So yeah, it hurts in terms of your ability to execute, and certain things are going to be rougher when you don't have a spring, when you don't have everything in the summer and all of that. But everybody else is dealing with the same stuff. So that is that's a real issue that you're not having to having a comparative disadvantage. You have to think about that when you then change out the schedule, and it's a much more advantageous schedule, and you're not losing a comparative advantage. I mean, everybody else has the same problems practice-wise as North Carolina. All of a sudden, I think you're in better shape. And especially with a second-year staff, it's your second year in an offense, and a couple of the teams that they're playing are first year in an offense or first-year head coach. In a second year in a system that on the offensive side, Longo's system is not the most complicated in the world. I mean, he only runs, a fairly limited number of concepts and really wants his guys to get good at those concepts. When the guys were doing some stuff in the summer, when there was some of those opportunities, and when they're doing it in camp, it's a little bit of an advantage in that respect that they're not running, the Jimbo Fisher offense where you've got so much to learn and to rep. You're on a more limited front, and it fits together nicely. And I think overall, this is a bit of an advantage for Carolina relative to what it would have been. I think they'll probably finish higher in the ACC and higher nationally as a result of this schedule than they would have against the last schedule, most likely.
Greg, to develop the chemistry, and we talk about this all the time, let's start on maybe the offensive line. Is chemistry going to be an issue, or has Phil Longo and Stacey Searles and Mac Brown, have they managed this going into this Syracuse game to where that may not be as big an issue as it could have been?
Yeah, I think the fact, because you did lose spring practice and you did lose some early summer workouts, you did miss out on some of that opportunity to build chemistry. But everybody did, right? And I think that's one of the reasons Mac talks about a lot of these early games are going to be ugly because look at Navy, for example. They weren't exactly sure how to hold training camp, so they really limited contact. And then they looked horrible against BYU. And I'm sure Navy will look a lot better as the season goes along. But that, you know, that decision that Ken had was not a good one in terms of, with regard to how his team actually played. North Carolina has maintained their focus on hitting, and so that helps. But I think the fact that North Carolina has so many key pieces on the offensive line back, that allows that chemistry to be rebuilt and continue on from last year. So that is a benefit. I think the bigger issue is they really wanted the spring season to develop some depth. And that's one of the reasons Matt keeps talking about, hey, we've really only got 6 guys that we're really comfortable with. And you're starting 5, and Ed Montelis coming off the bench at left guard. And then they like Jonathan Adorno, but of course, he's a young guy. He didn't get a spring practice in. True freshman who got training camp in, and that's really it. And so they're going to bring him along as quickly as they can for him to possibly be that 7th guy until Ty Murray gets healthy and can compete there at center. But I think they've navigated the chemistry issue as best they could, especially with having so many veterans back. But I think it really will show up, with the 2s and the 3s. And again, the hope is that if you can build decent leads against Syracuse and Charlotte, you can mitigate some of those concerns.
Jason, as a guy that played, how much depth can you build in games versus in the off season? Is that a comparable? Can you compare it that way? Because, like Greg said, these first 2 weeks, Carolina coaches are looking to build some depth. Can you accomplish that in a game, maybe better than you can, or whatever, compared to what could have been practice-wise?
I'm going to answer a nice 2-part answer here. Number one, it depends on how many teams you blow out and how quickly you're up by 40. So if you're sitting 42-0 in the third quarter, you can start to develop some depth. you can start to get real depth there because you're running guys out there, and even before you get to 42-0, you're starting to shuffle some other guys in even before that, just because you can, because you're better than the other team. So that helps. But even then, it's not, you can't develop depth as much during games as you can, say, during spring. Spring is really where a lot of that happens, in the first couple weeks of fall camp, because it's just a matter of reps. It's the number of reps you can have. And you think about it, when you're playing a game, you get half the number of reps that you get in a scrimmage in terms of your team, because only one unit is out there at a time. When you're in a scrimmage, you have both the offense and the defense are out there. They're both getting reps. In a game, your offense or your defense is out there. And so let's say you do get a full quarter to try to develop depth, and you're getting guys out there. You're still only getting 25 snaps for that group. That's not a ton. So yeah, maybe you can get 25, 30 snaps for your young guys in a blowout, but you compare that to, let's say, 3 full spring scrimmages where you can get those young guys 50 or 60 reps in live action, full contact live action, where you can actually get them some experience playing in your system in full contact situations, to where they're actually having to do their assignments and everything in a kind of get quasi game context. That's the value of those scrimmages in the spring. And then you have 1 or 2 of them before you get to real later preparation in the fall. That's when you're doing the bulk of your depth development, is when you're doing that stuff. And then that, not to mention all of the extra reps that are taken every day in individual segments and in team drills and all of that on non-scrimmage days. You're still having scrimmage periods where those guys are getting 10 or 15 reps. And that's, the equivalent of maybe half a quarter in a game. That said, you still need game experience before you're really ready, because, it is a little different with live bullets flying instead of practice rounds. So you need a little bit of both, but there's no substitute for what you get in the spring and in the early fall in terms of managing depth and being able to build guys into a place where they're more dependable.
Greg, in that same vein, the chemistry vein, the depth vein, Sam Howell's obviously the guy, no question. But one thing that I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that Reuter and Jacoby Criswell maybe aren't as far along as they would have liked. Maybe to no fault of their own, given the situation, but we've talked about how Sam Howell will be utilized more. Sam Howell's legs may get some more time, but that depth behind him, everybody speaks to that, but I'm not sure that it's really proven yet. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, for sure. And Jace Reuter, we've talked about him a lot over the years, but I mean, he's only played a handful of snaps due to injury those last 2 years. And so his skill set is there. He's an athletic guy, can run. He's improved his passing in recent years. So they think he's a guy they can count on. But again, even though he's been around, he hasn't really played. And Criswell, of course, is a true freshman. So not having, to kind of to Jason's point, to not having spring practice and all those multitudes of reps, and beyond that, you're going out after practice and throwing the ball with your wide receivers. That's the key component of it. And so they were really playing catch up. And I think that's kind of what Mac is speaking toward. Now, last year, one of the reasons they didn't feel comfortable running how, as you mentioned there, is because Vincent Amendola was the backup as a walk-on after Reuter got hurt and Cade Fortin left. So in order to correct that, it's not just enough to have bodies there. You have to get them ready. And so they're going to continue to give those guys a ton of reps and practice. But if you can build a big enough lead, again, you give them snaps and live game action to try to expedite that process, so that if you need them for any stretch of time later in the year, you can at least have some faith they can go in and execute their packages of plays. And that is one thing. It's difficult enough. While Longo's system clearly is simplistic, I don't know if that's the right word. That's probably a fair word to use. In terms of learning it, they really have stress given both Reuter and Criswell small packages to make sure that, hey, you guys, you're going to get in there. These are the small things we want you to do. This is what we want you to show us. Hey, I've got these down. And so there are going to be a small subset of plays, but that's how they're going to test them. That's how they're going to gauge how far along they've come. Once they can check those boxes, then everything kind of opens up for them.
Let me take a second right fast before we get too deep into the podcast to talk about Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com. Great sponsors of Inside Carolina podcast and of Inside Carolina, great friends of Inside Carolina, and great friends of you if you need Carolina gear, football gear. Football season's here. I still can't believe we're talking about a game plan podcast as the season starts in about 48 hours from when we're recording this. Johnny T-Shirt's your friend. Johnny T-Shirt needs you to support them as well. Get 10% off your order as an Inside Carolina Premium subscriber. Go to Franklin Street and see them if you happen to be in town, or order it. It comes to your door. I'm going to take another short break, pay the national bills. We'll be right back. We're back. Game Plan Podcast. I'm Tommy Ashley, Jason Staples, and Greg Barnes. Hadn't really talked a lot about the game plan yet, but now we will. And this has always been the portion that's most fun to me, because when I look back over these podcasts over the years, some days we got it, we nailed it. Other days we might as well have been talking about entirely different opponents and teams and all that. Jason,
entirely different sport in some cases.
Yeah. In some cases, for sure. I mean, our predictions that we'll have at the end of the show have been wonderfully awful at times. But Barnes, I know, we'll come to you later and you'll give us the perfect one. Jason, let me come to you about this game plan. We've talked about the issues. We've talked about the chemistry issues. How does Carolina approach this game with Syracuse? How do you see the Tar Heels coming out early, especially on offense, given everything that's going on? We'll talk about Syracuse and their issues in just a second. But from Carolina's side, what's the approach from Phil Longo and Mac Brown?
What I would do is I would want to come out and hang my hat on my running game. I look at what they've got up front on the offensive line and the pair of running backs that they have coming in, and then what Syracuse has coming back in terms of their overall defense. And they're undersized. They don't have a ton up front. They're okay. They've got one pretty good defensive tackle, but looking at the matchups, I feel like I can run the football on this team. And if you're going to be entering into a sloppy game, and what is most likely going to be a sloppy game and a sloppy season, if you can come out and establish your will in the line of scrimmage, go ahead and do that, and then let that set the tone, and then get a few play action passes and some things off of that, and work from there. But I'm handing the ball off to Javonte Williams, to Michael Carter, and seeing if Syracuse can stop the run at all, because I suspect coming into this game that Syracuse run defense is still going to be struggling a little bit, and if they can't stop the run, then all of a sudden your whole offense is open, and that makes things so much easier. So that's what I'd be doing. And I know Longo loves to throw the ball, but that's how I'd come into the game, is let's see if I can run it down their throats for a quarter and a half, and then open some things up after that.
Greg, we can talk about Syracuse's issues on offense. Speak to what you've learned about Syracuse's defense, and also, do you agree with Jason's approach for Carolina and Longo?
Yeah, I totally agree with Jason. Just because everybody's going to be primed and ready for Sam Howell, right? This is his Heisman Trophy candidacy beginning, right? So he's going to get all the attention, which he deserves. But when you look at a Syracuse team, and Jason has spoken to this before in prior podcasts, but really kind of worst case scenario for a lot of these new coaches is having to install schemes in the spring, and then of course you don't have the spring, and so you're having to rush new schemes in during training camp, and that's very difficult. And that's what Syracuse is having to do defensively. Tony White came over from San Diego State, and he's installed that San Diego State 3-3-5 that Rocky Long has played forever, because he's at New Mexico now. But it's a different look from what Syracuse has run before. And one of the reasons they've kind of installed it is they've struggled so much to get the talent in place that they need. And so they said, you know what, we're going to switch things up. We're going to try to be a little bit more creative in how we get pressure. And that's kind of what the 3-3-5 is designed to do. It's more, up front, it's going to look like a 3-4 scheme. But they use that rover position basically as a middleman to kind of judge, if he needs to come up and run support or kind of drop back. Jason can probably speak to that a little bit more, but that's kind of what they're looking at. And so when you've got a 3-3 front, or what will be probably a 3-4, you kind of take advantage of that and say, okay, what are they going to do? We know they're going to send pressure, because that's the whole concept behind the 3-3-5. It's not different in idea than what Jay Bateman wants to do. He wants to create confusion. They do a lot of stunting up front, and they want to be able to find some gaps. And I'm sure they're looking at North Carolina's issues from last year. I mean, UNC gave up 37 sacks. And we know some of the reasons behind that was Sam not being able to run because of QB depth. But that was still an issue. That was one of the things that kind of hindered this offense at times. And so how do you counter that? Well, you counter that by leaning on your run game early and kind of getting an idea of, all right, what are they wanting to do schematically that maybe we didn't plan for? And if you can lean on your rushing attack early, while still taking some shots, of course, you kind of get an idea, and you say, okay, well, we think we can exploit them here, or we can exploit them, in a vertical down the left, because they will run a lot of quarter coverage. That's kind of what they do with their safeties and quarterbacks. So a lot of those things will kind of come in as a chess match, more so than in your typical year, because Phil Longo, when he's looking at what Tony White wants to do, he's looking at what happened at San Diego State, and he's looking against at that bowl game against Florida State, because that was when Tony White kind of took over as DC in Arizona State. But he's really looking back at what Rocky Long did, because that's where Tony White got his feet wet. And when you're basing ideas and schemes off of not the last team, but maybe a previous team that a coach was coaching, things get kind of dicey. And so I think you take it very conservative early, and then you pick your spots to attack.
Jason, I heard Greg throw out that word quarters. And when I think of quarters, I think the ball's going deep. I think Sam Howell does get a few opportunities, maybe more than a few to air it out at some point. Do we expect to see that, or will we be talking after this game how maybe vanilla, for the common word that Longo approached it?
I think it's going to be pretty vanilla, frankly. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be some deep shots, because, I mean, you look at what the default plays are for Longo, and you're going to have 4 verts is going to be right up at the top of the list. You run 4 guys straight down the field is going to be right up at the top of the list of his bread and butter as a passing coach. So you're going to see some deep shots. And when teams are going to play quarters, you're going to try to pick on those safeties and try to hit those post routes and all that. So that doesn't change. The thing is, they actually have a set of deep safeties that all 3 of the safeties that they're going to play are pretty good. So those aren't the guys. If you're choosing who to pick on just by personnel on their defense, their safeties are their strength. Now, I think Carolina's receivers are still better than Syracuse's safeties, but that does give you a little indication of, well, maybe show a little respect there. And again, that gives you all the reason to use your size. I mean, Carolina's offensive line is huge, and, lean on them a little bit and see how they handle that. Now, the interesting side of this is, Greg brought up some similarities to Bateman's defense, and there's definitely some of that for sure. There's also a lot of similarity to what Wake Forest and Appalachian State do, and both of those defenses gave Carolina a lot of trouble last year in terms of undersized, quick fronts, and Carolina's offensive line is huge, like I said, and they struggled a little bit at times with the quickness from both of those fronts with all of the slanting and stunting that they did. And some of that was that those games were early in the year when they were still sort of getting a feel for personnel. The personnel was getting a feel for Longo's offense and who has what assignments against this stunt and that. And that's where you'd hope to see some improvement this year. But again, if you're Longo and Mac Brown, you want to figure out real quick, okay, can we block this kind of front better than we did last year? And you want to go out and get a shot to show that. And if you can, then all of a sudden everything else again gets really simplified, because then they have to drop that rover into the box. They have to add that extra run defender. And those quarter safeties start coming up real quick because they're expected to help in run defense. And that's when all of a sudden it's right over the top. It makes the game easy. And again, Sam Howell's in his second year, but some of us have talked about this a little bit off the air, is he's coming off a second year into that sophomore year where the expectations are through the roof, or through the ceiling roof, if you're in Chapel Hill. If I'm a coach, I expect Sam to handle that really well. I mean, I think he's well equipped to do that. But I also want early in the season, especially and early in those first couple games, to take some pressure off of him, to get him to make sure that he understands that I'm not expecting him to come into the year and be Tom Brady, all year, Patriots, Tom Brady, all of a sudden throwing the ball all over the field and depending on him exclusively. I want him to play within the offense. I want him to understand that things haven't really changed. He just needs to continue to be who he is and just take a step forward, and everything's going to be fine. So that's another thing that you're communicating by saying, look, we're going to come into this, we're going to lean on him, we're going to be patient, and I'm communicating to my team the mentality that I want. I want to be patient. I want to make sure that I take what's there. And there's going to be some stuff there, I think, against that front. So all told, I think there's a lot of things there that just in that matchup, I would like coming in as a first game. I think this is a great matchup for North Carolina coming in the first game when I'm looking at it on the offensive side in particular. I would love this to be my first matchup if I'm Phil Longo.
Methinks I'm going to steal the comment you made about the App State and Wake Forest defenses. Is something I talk about on Inside Carolina Live on Saturday morning as maybe my key to watch. Let's first of all, you each have 2 words. You can only utter 2 words. Offensive MVP for Carolina on Saturday. Greg.
Sam Howell.
That was 3 if we count it. Jason.
Javonte Williams.
Let's move on to defense.
But you give us harder questions next time, Tommy.
Well, look, you've got 25 guys to choose from. I mean, you could have picked somebody besides the obvious.
Ed Montilus. How about that?
Yeah, that's if he is the star, it might be some trouble. Defense, Syracuse. It's not as bad as I've read, I don't think. But Greg, Syracuse has got a world of issues on the offensive side of the ball. Uh, how on earth does Carolina not take serious advantage of that on Saturday?
Yeah, we talk a lot about matchups, and Jason's right, and I agree with him about UNC's offense having a good matchup against Syracuse's defense. The biggest question mark on North Carolina's team is this defensive line, and they're going up against an offensive line that was horrible last year. And some of the key pieces they thought they would have this year are not able to play in this game. So what you have is Chris Elmore, who is a fullback, is listed as your starting left guard. So when Raymond Vahasik and Jalil Taylor and Tamari Fox and Zach Gill get out there, it's going to be a good opportunity for them. It's probably going to be easier for them against Syracuse than it has been in some of the scrimmages. And that's what you want. You want to give those guys some opportunities to have success. But Dakota Davis at guard, I think he was penciled in at left guard. He was the guy that probably was Syracuse's best offensive lineman. He's banged up with injury. He'll be back at some point this year, but not for this game. And then Chris Bleich, I believe is how you say his name, started last year at Florida and transferred in the offseason, has not gained or been granted eligibility by the NCAA. So it looks like at least he's going to miss this game and may not be able to play this season. So those are two key pieces there. If you have both of those guys who they love, maybe we're having a little bit different conversation. But as it is, they do have some returning starters along the offensive line. But again, that group was just really bad last year. And Danny DeVito at quarterback. When he has time, he's pretty good. I was looking at this earlier, Tommy. I think this is pretty interesting. Last year, when DeVito was kept clean with no pressure, he completed 72% of his passes for 2,000 yards, 18 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. You will take that all day, any day. Unfortunately, the majority of the time he was under pressure, and that's where the 50 sacks come into play. That's just way too many. And talking with the Syracuse beat writer, he recalled several times where Dino went to a max protect with 7 guys, a running back and a tight end staying home to protect, and him still getting sacked. And so I think this is an opportunity. One concern that North Carolina has had, and I think it's a legitimate concern, is that they don't have the pass rushing ability that they would like. Mac has kind of harped on the fact you have to be able to create pressure with 4 guys up front consistently. That is not what they've seen in camp, and that's one of the reasons I think you're going to see not only Tamon Fox kind of be a key guy. I mean, he was going to be regardless, but they're really going to have to utilize Trey Morrison and Chaz Surratt, creating pressure on their own, sending them from different directions. And I think that's the key. If you can collapse that pocket, DeVito's not a poor athlete. I mean, he can run, but you don't want him having to scramble around in that offense that they use. And so if you can get him out of the pocket, moving around, that changes the dynamic of this game quite a bit. And with North Carolina's secondary playing the way that they apparently have been in training camp, that sets up the opportunity for not only sacks but also interceptions down the field.
I'm not going to mispronounce the kid's name or
Danny.
It's his twin Tommy is the actual quarterback. And if people are listening, going, "What the hell's wrong with Greg Barnes?" Go back and listen to the schedule podcast where I had the names perfect. Man, Danny DeVito was running the show at Syracuse until I was so rudely told it was not his actual name. Jason, that is one thing, and I'm trying my best not to say Danny, but DeVito, if my memory serves, and it's getting bad, he torched Carolina up in the Carrier Dome a couple 3 years ago, and he's not the same guy. He wasn't the same guy last year. Greg makes the point that it's all about the pressure. Well, this is one of those weakness on weaknesses. If Carolina's defense has one, like Greg mentioned, does Chaz Surratt, do they just turn Chaz Surratt loose? Because Syracuse doesn't have any running backs. They'll have guys back there, and their skill positions aren't, on the outside aren't the greatest. But I think this is a perfect opportunity for Bateman to at least gain some confidence in his guys' ability to get pressure, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the places where that makes you more confident in this game, it's not just about the pressure. It's that one of the reasons they got shelled in the Carrier Dome by DeVito a few years ago was that they just got whipped in the secondary. So you had basically Syracuse's receivers won a bunch of matchups. I mean, DeVito's completion percentage in that game was only 57.9, not great, but he threw 50-yarder and the overall yards per pass, he was over 10 yards or just under 10 yards an attempt in that game. So there was a lot of damage being done down the field against that Carolina defense, which the 2018 Carolina defense wasn't great. And yeah, it's some of it is pressure. Some of it is that their offensive line was terrible last year, and it's probably not going to be very good this year. But one of the things that just makes this a lot easier for Bateman and his defense is that they feel like their secondary actually can cover this year. And I can tell you last year, by the time they got to about week 3, week 4, that defensive staff didn't feel like their secondary could cover. So, I mean, they were calling very conservatively last year just because they knew, look, if we go split field coverage on this, if we go cover 4 or we go cover 3, or we go cover 4 or cover 2 here, we're going to get shelled. We can't cover those guys. So we're just going to have to mix and match and make sure that we have a guy that's playing way over the top in the middle of the field, and we're going to, play with some cushion and all that, because they just didn't believe that they could cover teams. This year, they feel like they can stick 4 corners out on the field that can all cover, and they can stick a nickel out on the field with 2 of those corners and be in a nickel defense and cover 3 guys comfortably and still have some help from the safety position and roll the safety down, and they can man cover. They can do a lot of different things. The flexibility is there to avoid the problems that they had a couple of years ago. So what that allows you to do is then, like you said, well, stick Surratt at one of the edges and let him go, or turn him loose on some blitzes and do a lot more to generate pressure. And you already know that they're going to struggle up front. So now you add to that, knowing that they probably aren't going to whip you outside. And it's a really good situation if you're coming into this as a defensive coordinator, knowing that personnel wise, the matchup looks good for you. Now you still want to make sure that you're not just being stupid and just, calling sellout blitzes the whole way, but you feel like your guys across the board can match up with their guys, and that allows you to do some things in the pass rush game that you couldn't otherwise.
Can I give you the 2-word question, Greg? Is that one too easy?
I think it's appropriate on the defensive side of the ball. Yeah.
2 words, defensive MVP.
Trey Morrison.
Jason?
Chaz Surratt.
Interesting. Morrison with a couple picks, you thinking, Greg? Couple picks, couple sacks.
What I'm excited about is Bateman said his goal is on one series to play Morrison at corner, nickel, and safety. So I'm going to be looking for that the whole game. That would be very – it's like Roy Williams trying to get Leaky Black to play all 5 positions in the game.
Nice. He ought to go ahead and get that knocked out, because I know you'll be checking for it. All right. We've covered both sides of the ball. We've talked a lot about these guys, and now we're going to do what we always do, and we're going to be better at it this year. We're going to do predictions. And I'm going to start with Greg, because I found out last year, folks, if you're listening, new listeners to this, Greg Barnes would it's like the old Price is Right type thing. If I said 24-17, he'd be like 25-18 or something. Greg, you're first, so we can do that to you. Carolina Syracuse noon on the ACC network in a empty Kenan Stadium.
Now, just correct me if my memory is wrong, Tommy. I believe Jason and I both picked Carolina to finish 6-6 during the 2019 regular season.
Oh,
Right?
do you have proof? Do we need to go listen to that show?
I'm sure we have the podcast saved somewhere. Jason,
I-
is that right?
If I remember right, that's correct.
Wow, that's impressive. I don't remember that. I know I had the first like 5 or 6 games on the money.
Now, I think I got 10 of the games wrong, but in total, it worked out.
You had the record right.
Yeah, it was. I was in a similar boat where I picked the wrong games that they won in preseason, but I had a good sense of basically where they'd fit. And the thing is, in our defense here, Greg, how many games were decided by less than by touchdown or less last year?
9.
Yeah, so you could have just flipped a coin on all those games, and we flipped the coin, and it just came up the wrong way. We knew it would be a coin flip. We just didn't know which one it would come up on which game. So
I'm glad we don't get paid to predict. We get paid to cover. Greg, you're the best one at covering. Let's see what you got predicting.
That's right.
Well, I think North Carolina's offense is legit. Will be one of the best in the country. And while I do think North Carolina's back seven should be much improved over last year, I do have some legitimate reservations about that defensive front. And so they're going to have to prove it to me before I put a lot of stock in how good that defensive front can be. So I think Syracuse will score some points, not near enough to keep up with North Carolina. I've got UNC winning this one 41-27.
41-27. You writing them down, Jason?
I'm writing mine down right now.
Okay, well, you're up. Greg's got 41-27. I think, did I see CFN or something had like 34-30 Carolina? So that's not.
I don't think it's going to be – I don't expect this to be a close game late in the fourth quarter.
If it's
maybe
that
a
close.
backdoor score or something.
Jason, what you got?
I think this is going to be a runaway. I actually think Carolina is going to cover this game. I think the spread last time I saw it was 22.5.
Yep.
And honestly, I think looking at the matchups in this game, I actually like Carolina to cover that. I just think that this is one of those where not only are the teams mismatched, I think the matchups just happen to fall in Carolina's favor. So I'm going to go with them to cover this game, and I'm going to go with 45-17. I think they're going to give up a couple plays, and I think there will be some frustration at times as the defense works out some kinks up front. But ultimately, I just think they're going to run away with this game, and Syracuse's inability to stop either the run or the pass on the defense is going to be a factor that is ultimately going to be decisive in this game.
Greg, are Syracuse's top 2 running backs? They hadn't shown up yet, have they? At the time of this recording,
they are. Well, they have shown up, and they've shown up to say that they're not going to play. They're preparing for the NFL draft, and I think they combined for like 700 yards last year. So
yeah. So Carolina's defensive line, like Greg said, has some issues. That worries me. It worries me to see how they can hold up against good offenses with good running attacks. Syracuse doesn't have it. I'm going 52-9.
Whoa.
I know that's insanity, but I'll probably change it.
It's not that crazy though, because again, here's the thing: how much is Syracuse going to be able to run the football in this game?
That's what I don't think.
If Carolina's up 21-0 early, is Syracuse going to lean on the run all game and just try to get out of there? I mean, that's the real question, and that's where I think when you do have a little bit weaker defensive line, if you put up a lot of points, that can help mitigate that a little bit, just in the sense of teams are going to have to throw to beat you.
So I can go ahead and get on the record. I'm going to say Diami Brown is the offensive MVP because I think Longo loves to throw it. I think it should be Javonte or Carter, but I think they'll throw it more than they need to. On defense, I'm going to say Storm Duck with a couple picks and then a sack. And then I just think Carolina does what they want. If Syracuse could run it, it would be concerning. I don't see it happening. I think it's a great time for a lot of guys to get some playing time. Greg, just so our readers our listeners know, how has the media's role changed in the COVID season as far as covering the ball games?
Well, it's going to be quite different. Number one, you don't have to deal with any kind of traffic due to no fans being in attendance. So that is a positive. But we are being granted access to the press box. There's going to be social distancing up there. So we have a very small number of media members that can actually attend. And then there's not going to be any post-game interview access. We'll just sit and they'll pipe in the press conference into the press box.
Really?
So it'll be change. It'll be quite a change, and it'll be different and a challenge for sure. But it's 2020. It's been a hell of a year, and we all kind of have to adapt, and this will be no different.
Interesting stuff. That'll definitely be different. I was surprised on the post game. I was wondering how they were going to do it. Of course, if you're listening to this and you're on our message boards, Inside Carolina Live on Saturdays, 3 hours before kick, Joey Powell and myself, Throwback podcast host and 40 Club host Joey Powell, going to be live in WCHL's studios, bringing you the Inside Carolina Live pregame show. We got it all covered for the 2 hours up until Jones and the Tar Heel Sports Network take over. So come see us 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Stream it, listen to it on your dial. Greg Barnes will be on it. Jason Staples will be on it. Same Inside Carolina crew you always get. Johnny T-shirt will be involved some way or another. You need to. There might be some swag available, some free swag available if you're lucky. Greg and Jason, I'm still not totally convinced. I said the other day the ball needs to be in the air on the opening kickoff, but it looks like we're getting there. Thanks for joining me, boys.
Thanks, Tommy.
What a pleasure to actually be doing this again. Thanks, Tommy.
Talking football. We'll see you guys soon.